Welcome to the Groundswell Podcast. I'm Elliot Sands, Executive Director of Live Faith First, and I'm with Bruce Strom, founder and CEO of Administer Justice, the author of Gospel Justice, and then his most recent book, Persevering Power. Bruce, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I got to tell you, I'm a little jealous about the fire you have going in the background. I know it's a fake fire, but I'm still kind of wanting to warm my hands here a little bit. So thank you for bringing that coziness.
I'm just outside Chicago, Elliot, so it gets cold in Chicago. So even fake fireplaces are just a nice reminder of the warmth that can come from fire.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation to hear a little bit about what you've done with Administer Justice and then your latest book as well. So before we hop into that, tell us a little bit about your life, your story. How'd you get where you are today? Just kind of give us a little of the cliff notes of your life.
Sure, Elliot. So I grew up the son of a Baptist preacher, and that was a great way to grow up in the church. I also grew up in a day, though, when my father didn't even own a house, because that's what churches did. And so we were in rural areas, so we were fairly poor. And I swore that I wasn't going to be poor when I got older. And so that meant for me that I was either going to be a doctor or a lawyer. To this day, I can't stand the sight of blood. So it was an easy choice for me. And I became a lawyer, did very well in school, graduated, did well coming out of law school, but knew that I could even make significantly more money if I started my own law practice, which I did almost immediately. Built that to several different law offices. I was a senior partner, had a very successful trial practice, got to argue cases all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and was doing very, very well. But somewhere along the line, I really missed that life wasn't about me, that it was about how God could use me in the loving service of others, as I talk about in the book, both Gospel Justice and Persevering Power. And it was through the prayers of my wife. I'm blessed to be married to a wonderful Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx in New York City. So we could not be more different than a rural Ohio kid and a Bronx Puerto Rican girl. Yet that's what God does, because that's the beauty of his tapestry, bringing diverse people together. Because we are stronger together, united in that. And it was through her prayers that Administer Justice started 23 years ago. And God sent a lot of conflict into my life. He'll do that. He will send storms of circumstances. I talk about some of these storms of circumstances in the book, right? To get our attention. And God was getting my attention through lots of conflict that resulted in the shutting down of my law practice and finding myself starting Administer Justice full-time, again, 23 years ago. So since then, I've been in this wonderful ministry that helps people who cannot access attorneys.
Wow, that's amazing. And feel like we have a few connection points there. My grandfather was a Baptist pastor as well, and then my dad became a pastor later in his career. So we got that, and then I also married a Hispanic woman who was born in San Francisco and raised in San Jose. And for me, anyway, it's been a massive blessing in my life just to have a variety of thought and diverse thought and life history and background and all that stuff. So,
amen.
Very cool.
Completely agree.
Would you tell us? I want to dig into Administer Justice for us here a little bit today. So, tell us a little bit about Administer Justice, but I'd love to hear kind of the why behind the founding of that organization. So, would you dig in a little bit on that for us?
Absolutely. So, I think God allows suffering in our life, and Persevering Power talks a lot about suffering. I think there's always that question, why does God allow suffering and such brokenness in this world, right? Such injustice. For me, it would seem on the outside like I had everything together. I'm a senior partner of a really successful multi-site law practice, and lawyers are not poor. And so doing what the world would see as being very successful and doing well, and yet I just was missing so much what God had for me. The suffering that I personally experienced was my wife and I couldn't have children. And so no matter how much money I had, no matter how much whatever, I couldn't force God to give us children, and we couldn't force it. And it was a 7-year-long roller coaster ride. And maybe some of your listeners have gone through infertility. It can be brutal because it's a month to month kind of just crazy roller coaster ride. And as I went through that suffering, God began to help me identify with others who's suffering. The suffering can be different in different things, but that was my suffering that allowed me to at least first. Now, God would bring many other suffering into my life uh, He took me on a journey, but that was my first great suffering. It was in the midst of that my wife, while she was, I should say that at the end of 7 long years, God heard her prayers for our children and her prayers to get a hold of my heart. And just when we had given up, Elliot,
Mm.
literally, that's the theme in the book too. You have to give up so often for
Yeah.
God to truly show up, and that was true in our lives. We literally gave up, and God showed up. And we were at the doctor's office for the 1,000th time, and we saw in the sky we saw on the fetal monitor, because we're being watched and stuff, but we saw 2 little tiny heartbeats just coming out of like peanuts. They're like little cartoons, because it is just a little peanut shape, and there's big heartbeats. Uh, and we knew we were having twins. We left the doctor's office that day, and there in the sky was a wonderful double rainbow.
Wow.
And that just meant so much, especially when 9 months later, we were at a restaurant with friends and family, and the entire restaurant cleared outside because our boys were going to be born the next day by C-section. And there in the sky was the brightest double rainbow I've ever seen. And so God, God's promises are real. His timing is never our timing, but it is perfect. And it was through that long stage of suffering and God's answer, finally, after those long years, that helped to get a hold of my heart. And in particular, when my wife was pregnant in 1998 with our sons, she made a Christmas present for me. Uh, and she hand wrote out 365 verses of justice from the Bible. And I just read through those every single day. And I was struck by, I knew the Bible, I'd grown up in church, but how much I missed the second most prominent theme in Scripture, which is justice for the poor and vulnerable. And as I read through those, I came across one in particular from the book of Zechariah that says, "This is what the Lord Almighty said, administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another." That became the founding verse of Administer Justice that would begin shortly after my sons were born. They were born in 99. Administer Justice began in the year 2000. And they've all grown up together, and it's been a great blessing along the way. But that's kind of the impetus of how Administer Justice got started,
Yeah.
and how God began to at least call me into that ministry.
Yeah. It's funny. My wife and I, we watch a lot of Law and Order and crime shows and those types of things. And we laugh almost every time when, somebody's getting arrested and they yell to their spouse, "Call my lawyer," because who has a lawyer on speed dial? Now, obviously you do. And my wife happens to work for the legal department at a large corporation, so she does too. But beyond that, most people don't have a lawyer on speed dial. Or if you do, you've been through a bunch of junk. In light of that, why should we come alongside, widow, orphan, immigrant, this idea of justice? I'm going to add impoverished to that. Like, how can legal services or lack of legal services make a difference?
Well, there's 2 ways. First, as you already referenced, the name of my first book was Gospel Justice, because I believe that the gospel is central to justice. In the book Persevering Power, I say, look at the word justice. And I think that can help readers. I mean, if you look at the word, what is the heart of justice? If you just look at the word in English, the center of that word is the letter T. But the T to me forms a cross. And so to me, the heart of justice is the cross of Jesus. And how can we ignore the spiritual needs of people around us and the legal needs of those around us? Now, there are multiple types of needs that can be considered, I think, within a broad umbrella of justice, which is all about restoring people and restoring in the midst of brokenness. That's really the biblical concept of justice, is to restore that which is broken, right that which is wrong. And a lot of times when you encounter legal issues, you're just broken. You're overwhelmed. Already circumstances, a family that's falling apart, already those things around you, the loss of a job, these other things, already that is a difficult circumstance. And then the law just makes it 10 times worse or 100 times worse, because now suddenly you're left to try to navigate a confusing system. You're left to do it on your own because you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to pay for a lawyer. And it just can be crushing. And what a great opportunity for God's people to enter into that dark space, and so that the people walking in darkness can see a great light, as Isaiah would say, and to bring that light of Christ into that arena, to bring clarity out of the confusion that a lawyer can do, and to bring love and support that a loving team can do, which is how we serve in communities across America.
Yeah. How does administer justice work? Like just the kind of the logistics of it. Like what is a typical, I don't know if you call them a clinic, but what does that look like? What would that look like if somebody called up Administer Justice? What would that look like?
Sure. So if it's true right now, if somebody goes to administerjustice.org, they can get help. There's a wonderful map of our 89 locations across the country right now in 15 states. They can put in their zip code and they can find the nearest location. They're all in churches because we believe that the church is God's plan for reaching the world. We know the church is broken just as people are broken, but it's a great opportunity for the bride of Christ to live out his heart of justice for the poor, vulnerable, you're right, impoverished, immigrant, widow, fatherless, those modern day individuals that still reflect his heart and his concern for them. And so on a Saturday morning, once a month, these centers operate because they're run by volunteers that are fully trained through our national office that includes lawyers and 8 other team members. So there's a role for everybody to play in justice. I don't believe Micah 6:8, which was a great invitation on what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. I don't think that's just for lawyers alone. It didn't say what's required of you lawyers. It was, oh, you mortal, right, or you man. And so it's a great opportunity for different people to be trained to do practical legal ministry. Every Saturday morning, somebody's going to walk in. They're really overwhelmed. They're really nervous. Maybe they're kind of skeptical of the church because they've seen what the news says or what some churches don't do a favor to Jesus, I think. But they walk in and there's a wonderful team that has hospitality, has treats out for them, hot chocolate or coffee, has games or things for their kids because a single mom has to come in with children and they're watching them. They have all of these things available just to welcome them. Then somebody takes down the details, like your wife who works for Center, right? You've got to have somebody who's administrative that makes sure all of that's taken care of. Then they get to meet with an attorney who's going to listen well, who's going to ask right off the bat if they can pray for them. Well, nobody expects that of a lawyer in America. I mean, that's the last image they have. And so when that lawyer prays, it just kind of overwhelms them. They're like, wow, this person really does care and is listening to me, because in our legal system isn't designed to listen to people. And so people feel so shut out of it and they feel so unheard. And to have somebody who's really listening and caring and compassionate, and then can actually give good practical guidance. Every lawyer is going to be a coach. They don't represent in court, but they're going to coach them, put together a next steps plan that's unique for them and their situation. And then somebody else is going to help them, an advocate that's going to help them understand, explore other issues that are going on. Spiritual, where is God in the midst of this suffering? Yeah. We're here on every Sunday morning, Please join us. And is going to also explore social needs. They need food, they need shelter, they need jobs, whatever else. There may be some other things that are needed because people are not legal problems to be solved. They are neighbors to be loved. And so we want to be about that holistic approach, and even connecting them with the local church. And then they'll be followed up on a few weeks later with their plan. Somebody will follow up. How'd you do? Do you need more help? Come back. We'll continue to coach you and walk alongside you as long as you need. And that's kind of how the process works.
Wow. That's incredible. That is, and you took the word right out of my mouth, that holistic idea of, people come in with fears. If you have ever received a legal notice, from, it doesn't even matter whether it's from the county or the state or a lawyer or wherever it is, it's always daunting to try to find, well, plus it's a foreign language half the time too. I mean, it might be English or Spanish or whatever your native language is, but it's hard to understand. So even coming in with fears that are met with people who are bringing peace. And I love that idea of there's probably more going on than just this legal issue.
Yeah.
There's probably something else there, whether it's a physical need or some other need in their home, their life. That is amazing. And at the end and in the show notes, I'll put the your web address. So anybody who's interested in starting one of these in your church, I noticed there was none in California, so I looked up our zip code, and there's a Arizona was as close as we got. So
That's true. So please, somebody who's listening from California, it's no cost to the local church. Also, I will say we figured out how to make this easy. Our mantra, if they go to the website, is justice made simple.
Yeah.
That's our goal, because we want people to live out the call of God in their life. And so each of these locations, honestly, Elliot, do cost $5,000. I talk about it a little bit in the book too. But there are donors who love to give that. Most of the time, if you want to have a lifetime impact as a donor, as a philanthropist, you have to put $1 million down to have your name put on a building somewhere. Here, for $5,000, you can literally impact a whole community forever, because that once it's open, we invite clients to be part of the process. We want to do this with them, not for them. And so they'll pay a $30 copay one time. That's it. So it's not the $318 right now, national average per hour lawyer fee, but it is something to be a part of the process, an invitation. And that alone helps pay for the continuing cost that our insurance cost, database systems cost, website cost, some of these other actual costs that we fully provide to a local church. But the local church gets that, and they get to see dashboards of impact, and they get to see people trained and discipled in justice to serve the community. All of that at no cost. And so I just think that I do pray that somebody listens in California. If one, this will be time very, very well spent together, Elliot. So thank you.
Anyway, let's see what the Lord does with this. This is, I like I said, when I read your book, I was really wanting to dig in on the book. And then as I heard more of the stories in the book, like, my goodness, there's so many other things to talk about. But with that, let's segue to the book a little bit.
Sure.
So the name of your book is Persevering Power, and you talk about 4 directions we should look when we're tackling big issues. One is look up, one's look back, one's look in, the other is look around. Now, you might need to briefly unpack these, but why did you choose the order of up, back, in, and around? Was that a purposeful choice of why it's important that we kind of go through those stages?
Yes, it was very purposeful, because looking up is where everything has to begin, perspective. And as I said, Elliot, we spend way too much time looking down, which is clearly not on that grid. Because if you just think physically, and that's what I just say, physically, like today's a nice day. You get a lot of those in California. We love them in Chicago when we get them, because you go out right now, it's really nice and sunny. If I look up, 2 things are true. One, I can't see myself. But what I can see is a vast expanse. And that's so important, because we tend to make our problems so much bigger in our own eyes, and we make God really small when we get in difficult circumstances. That's because we're looking down. If you look down, now it's the opposite. All I see is mostly myself in a very, very limited perspective. Yeah. And so perspective is just so important, to know that God is bigger than our circumstances. He is able, and to trust and believe that. It's just got to be the starting place. And then it's got to be starting place with your purpose in that God loves you. It's not in what you do. So many of us want to, think we have to earn things or do things, or we measure ourselves by our job or by different titles or different relationships. It's not about that. It's just know that God has profound love for you. He created you. He made you in his image. You are an image bearer of him, and that gives you your worth and your value. And he desperately wants a relationship with you. And if you'll trust in him, and you'll believe that he did die for you, rose from the dead, and wants this relationship with you, wants to be your daddy, wants to be your father, then that perspective matters and just changes everything. So that's why I say looking up is the first and most important place to start, because we often skip right past that, and then we never really can have persevering power.
Yeah. Then you talk about looking back, looking in, and looking around. Now, when you talked about looking in, and you can tell us a little bit about that, but you addressed peace and pride were kind of the two subjects you talked about, or inner attitudes, maybe I should say, you talked
Mhm.
about. And there's clearly a list of things that I need to work on, both positive and negative, work on and cultivating, work against, cultivating, right? And why did you choose peace and pride? So tell us a little bit about the looking in thing, and then why did you choose peace and pride? Why are those kind of so important in this process of persevering?
Sure. I do think that pride is the greatest destructive force against peace. We could say that there's lots of things, but honestly, at its core, I think it's pride. It's it's being selfish. It's thinking that we know better, or we want or deserve more, or any of these things. Those kinds of lies. It is what had Satan fall from heaven himself. I mean, he is the father of lies. He is the great uh, author of pride, and we are too, being sinners. And I just find that if you cut down through it, you can look at all of these other things, unforgiveness, and I talk about some of these things. You can look at bitterness, you can look at anger, you can look um, at depression, or any of these things as you look in. But I think their core is pride. So I talk about our need to really be able to confess our pride and just recognize we can't do it. And I think a lot of times that's God's gift in suffering, is you really do realize I can't do it. I can't do this on my own. I can't heal myself if it's a physical issue I'm going through. I can't make this relationship work. I mean, I can only do my part. I can't control that. So I can't do that. I can't in this legal thing. Then you're really going to be overwhelmed. I know I can't do that. And uh, all of these things. And so we need to be able to let go of that control. We really, really do. And that's pride. Pride is what makes us want to hold on to it. Peace, if we can truly, fully let go, then peace, we can at least begin a process toward peace. Peace really is, and I talk a lot about silence. We really do need to be able to still the noise. We really do need to understand Sabbath, the delight in that seventh day rest. Many people have written on that, and it's true. And then rhythms of rest, right? Where it's okay. So many of us, especially in a justice world like I live in, we're like all about do, 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 and run, 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 run. But we really need to be able to rest, and to be able to just sit with our dad, with God, and listen for his voice instead of always talking at him. Listen for that still small whisper,
Yeah.
and then have the courage to respond, because he is going to invite us to do things. He doesn't want us to sit so still that we're of no use, right? I mean, he created us not to sit, but to serve. But you got to start with sitting. Just like I talked about with the Mary and Martha. Mary had it right. You got to start with sitting at the feet of Jesus, even though he was never saying anything bad about Martha serving. He was
Right.
just saying she was distracted, worried, and upset about many things because she started in the wrong place. So that's the importance, and that's how we'll find peace, that inner peace that we desperately need to give us the strength to be able to face all the tumult and all the injustice and all the brokenness of the world.
Yeah. And I love in your book, you tell the story of being on a phone call with a mentor, friend,
Yeah.
colleague, and 30 minutes of prayer and then 30 minutes of silence, as I think were the numbers. And
That is.
I'm thinking to myself, that feels like a really awkward 30. I mean, I can't be quiet by myself for 30 minutes, let alone if I'm in the room or on a phone with somebody. So that I'm sure took a certain amount of strength and perseverance just to sit quietly, to listen for the Lord was the point of it, to listen for what the God was doing there.
Completely true, though, Elliot. I'll bet your listeners are the same as me, right? Because we're active people. We live in an active world. You're right, John. And what they need to know is John Robb, who was my mentor, was in his 80s, upper 80s. So, of course, I thought in that stillness, I really did think that he'd fallen asleep. Um, and I did not know how to wake him up. And that's the story I tell, because what you just said, I thought, okay, 30 minutes, I can do this. I literally looked down at my watch and it was like 2 minutes. I thought, this is going to be impossible. And then I started going so frantic. But then when John, at the end of the 30 minutes, spoke with such peace filled, I mean, a peace that honestly, that was many years ago, that I just had never experienced. You can hear it in someone's voice when they are just so close to God. And it was really a great instructional moment for me, that I really did need to quiet my heart instead of going through all kinds of crazy emotions. And all of us need to do that. Really, we need to do it for at least a little bit every day, but certainly build in strong rhythms to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. I think in your book that might have been one of the most convicting pieces for me, because I'm the same as you. I'm doing, I'm acting, I'm thinking, I'm planning, all of those things. And um, I seek the Lord, and you said this. I want the Lord's will, so I ask Him. Please be clear. Give me wisdom. Give me insight. Give me direction. And then we just continue on with our day without actually stopping for a moment to go, okay, I'm going to give you a chance. I've been doing a lot of talking for the last 5, 20, 30, whatever minutes, and not giving God an opportunity to actually respond to what you've just spent some time asking of Him. And so I love that. I love that concept. I have one more question for you. I actually have two. This is our next to last question here. But you talked about stewarding provision. This was one of your last chapters. Really enjoyed it. And you talked about a number of different, ways that we can do that. So I'd love you to kind of dig in a little bit about, what does stewarding provision look like? As followers of Jesus, we believe He's given us everything. And so what does it look like to turn some of that provision back to Him? And when I think provision, I often think money. So then you expand it beyond that. So would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Elliot, it's a great segue out of what you were just mentioning, because it is really, God has given us everything. So that includes our time, includes our talent, includes our treasure. And what you were just saying, I think that's one of our problems in prayer, is time, right? Like, as if the time were owned by us and we have to be responsible to move things forward, instead of all things being owned by God. And that includes our time. And how silly is it to run ahead in our time and not talk to God? It's like never talking to your parent, never talking to your spouse, or in the book I talk about never talking to your boss, right? I mean, how are you going to get direction on what to do if you literally never talk to them? But that's the problem. We see time as this finite thing that we have to control. The same thing can be true with our talents. God has given us different talents, and I do talk about that. Like, we rely on the talents of lawyers, and I love inviting them to use their talents, which are very specific and unique, but also talents of other people that have gifts, what we frequently say in the church world, of hospitality, of mercy, people who care deeply about justice. We can use our talents as well and steward them, because, again, all of our time, especially lawyers, we measure our time on 6-minute clocks, and we get paid a whole lot of money in that 6 minutes, as anybody who's ever had to hire a lawyer would know. So we sometimes think that time, or that our time, is somehow more valuable than somebody else's time. Completely false, right? In God's economy, no, He owns all the time. And who knows, just like the story Jesus said, in an instant you could die. How foolish it was that you were building these bigger barns. Tonight your life's going to be required of you. And then what was all that time that you thought you had that you were doing? So
Yeah.
It's so important to see time and talents as gifts from God. And then, sure, the things that He's given us are there to share. Money and resources are there to share. He wants us to do that wisely. There are a lot of great resources out of there. So, of course, there are wonderful resources to get out of debt so that you're not a slave to the lender. And so that you have resources, so that you literally can share those resources. And what a joy and blessing it is to give. I mean, it really is more blessed to give than to receive. And I know friends who know that they can't hold too tightly or want to control too tightly the money or anything they've been given, are just some of the most joy-filled people I know. And so I love generous people. I just believe that they reflect the heart of our generous God.
Yeah, that's great. And I do think it can be challenging for people. So often I believe we think, if I'm serving God, I'm going to be serving in some lesser capacity than what I'm trained to do. I.e., I'm a lawyer, but I'm going to be an usher at church. And there's nothing wrong with ushering at church. Please usher at church, right? But with that said, you've gained an education and an experience that allows you as a lawyer to do something different than a large percentage of the population. And so how do we use your God-given career and skill and training in meaningful and impactful ways? And that can be true for, engineers and doctors. And, you go down the list of people who've really spent a career getting trained and doing certain things, but I don't even want to limit it to, I'm going to say some of these, higher end careers as well, because there are God has given each person, however he's built you and whatever career opportunities given you, to turn that around and serve him with it. And I think when we talk about stewarding resources, time and money are the first two that we look at. And I think there's maybe a third or fourth, but definitely a third, which is God's given me a career. Now how do I do this? Whether it's full-time, as you've chosen and I've chosen, or in some sort of this is how I serve capacity. And so there's, great opportunities to maximize those gifts that God's given you. So I love that.
Amen.
And I love that you talk about Administer Justice. I'll go back to that quickly here. But on those Saturday mornings, there's a hospitality team. There's an admin team. There's a gospel team. There's a follow-up team. I don't know all the teams you have, but just what you described to me, I can think of so many skill sets that arrive there in any given Saturday that God's going to use all of them, all of y'all, to do his work. And everyone is just as important as the other to make sure that people are welcomed and that they're served and that they're, holistically cared for. So anyway, I love it.
It's a beautiful way to live out 1 Corinthians 12, right? If you think about the body of Christ, and it's what you were saying. It's the head is not more important than the foot. So just because you're a doctor or a lawyer does not make you more important than somebody who can bake really good cookies. In fact, I can assure you that for some people coming in the morning, they might actually appreciate that as much or more. So never, right? But there are different gifts that God's given, and they're not better or worse, but they all are to be used together. If we're not all using them together, then we're really missing something in God's design for us. And I know the teams that we see, it's just so beautiful. They all love that they each have different talents and abilities that they're bringing to the table. We often have social workers and paralegals and other kinds of caseworkers and hospitality bakers and prayer warriors, right? And interpreters. You can look at a lot of different talents there. Without any of them, it's just not as good. You bring them all together and it really is powerful.
Right. And a case could be made that several of those, without them being there, it doesn't even function.
That's right.
Talk about an interpreter. If you don't have an interpreter, that's going to be a really short or long day trying to figure out how to, get the news across, right? And anyway, absolutely. I love that. And I'm just going to do our quick, live faith first pitch. That statement that you made about the body of Christ coming together for Administer Justice, I believe is the same as when we have bodies of Christ that are segregated and on a Sunday morning and not coming together. I think we also lose out on ways that we can impact our community as well. So there's
Amen.
There's a lot of crossover there. All right, I have one last question for you. So the last question is, what's exciting you? What encourages you? What, when you think about it, that you go, oh, that makes my face light up? Now, it could be your family, it could be your twins, it could be your wife, it could be a Bible verse, a project you're working on. But what's something that just is exciting you right now?
Yeah, Elliot, I get excited when God can use me as a catalyst to encourage others to use the time, talent, and treasure that they've been given, especially that time and talent to serve his kingdom. So yes, I'm thrilled with my sons. My sons are now 24. One is in law school, and he's there for the right reasons instead of me, right? I went for money. He goes for meaning, and he's serving in all kinds of legal aids and doing just amazing work. And I love that. His twin brother works for a state senator. I mean, he's doing justice work on the front lines as well. And so I've got these wonderful justice lovers who love Jesus and justice and who love just seeing that practically lived out in community, and love that. My wife does a lot within the Hispanic community and other communities, and she serves and travels with me. So I love that as a family, we're pursuing Jesus and justice. But I also love that we invite other people. And every time a lawyer who's afraid because they're I have one lawyer who does nuclear something or other. I mean, even I don't understand it, right? And so they think they can't be useful to somebody, but that is just so limiting of God. And it's not true. When they come in, they know a whole lot more than the person that's before them, and they're coming in objectively. And when they realize that, when they realize that they actually can be helpful and used by God, just seeing them come alive because they're living their faith in community with others and to impact a community for Christ, it is so beautiful. So that brings me profound joy. And so every time a new center opens through a church and a new community is impacted and volunteers are living on mission for Him, that is a joy and a privilege that I do not take lightly, and I'm truly, truly grateful for.
Yeah, that is great. Well, Bruce, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to hear your story, hear the work that you're doing, and I encourage folks to go out, pick up the book, and I'll put in the show notes the URL for your Administer Justice, so check that out. And if this is something that your church might be interested in joining, go to the website and let's get some more of these clinics set up in churches around the nation. I'd love to see a few more here in the Bay Area. So, Bruce, again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, let's go out and live faith first.